Welcome back to Money in Medicine. I'm Werner Ratting. This is my colleague Stefan Botma. In the previous episode of Money in Medicine, we talked about the importance of life cover and how you quantify life cover. And we think that today we're going to focus on the importance of nominating a beneficiary on that life cover policies. For the first time viewers of this podcast, Stefan, just share with them why we started Money in Medicine and what's the purpose of this platform.
So thanks for the introduction, Werner. We wanted to create a platform that is easy to understand, layman, that a normal medical professional can understand. It's an educational platform where you can literally join in, you can laser focus on a certain topic that you want more information on and educate yourself to make financial decisions going forward.
So beneficiaries. What is a beneficiary and what's the importance of nominating a beneficiary?
I think it's important to start with the basics. So a beneficiary is a person or a legal person that you nominate in the event of death to which that proceeds will pay out. Why is it important? Well, if no beneficiary is nominated, it can form part of your estate, and we'll touch on that later in the video, which will then attract unnecessary taxes and costs, etc., etc. Otherwise, it can also mess up your estate plans. It can actually deteriorate your wealth if that doesn't go to the right person that you've nominated.
Yeah, basically, it just deteriorates the whole plan.
Yes.
If you don't nominate a beneficiary. The most common beneficiary types that you deal with on a daily basis is going to be a spouse, it's minor children, it's your estate, it's trusts, and then third parties. But let's start with the spouse. What's the tips that we can share with them, Stefan, in terms of nominating a spouse?
Well, in essence, any life policy that you nominate a beneficiary on will actually form part of your estate. So there will be, it's a bit technical, but it is deemed property within your estate. However, with a spouse, there's what they call a rollover on estate duty, which is quite a nice benefit, specifically if that is the means or the purpose of that policy is to provide for, maybe your children, etc. Okay. It's a good idea to nominate that through to the spouse.
And also in nominating your spouse is a lot of insurance companies make provision on life insurance policies for an immediate needs benefit.
Yes.
Not all the insurance companies make provision for that, but in essence, a immediate needs benefit is roughly about 50,000 Rand that pays out to a nominated beneficiary within 48 hours after your death. And we recommend that you nominate your spouse as that beneficiary because that will give your spouse liquidity to help them pay with any immediate expenses that they might be faced with. For instance, funeral expenses or accounts that needs to be paid.
100%
on that.
The second most common beneficiary that we deal with is minors. We actually get a lot of clients that nominate a minor, which I understand in essence, the principle is I can understand it's a good, the intention is there. However, just be cautious that you need to make provision because that minor will get the proceeds because there's still a legal binding between the insurance company and that minor to get the proceeds. So make provision via your will in a testamentary trust that you can set up in your will to avoid that money being paid up and ending up in a guardian's fund and you don't know, who's splurging that money on behalf of your minors.
And then a trust. A trust can also be nominated as a beneficiary. There's two types of trust that we deal with. You get an inter vivos trust. That will be a trust that's already been established, that's an existing trust.
A living trust.
Living trust. And then you get a testamentary trust. A testamentary trust will be a trust that you make provision for in your will. That will be, for instance, where you want to bequeath money to a minor child to provide for that child, but you don't want that money to be paid to the guardian's fund or to the guardian that's going to look after your child.
Yes.
Then, in the event of your death, a testamentary trust will be created to provide for your child from a fiduciary point.
The benefits of a trust is longevity. So yes, and you can set up the trust deed in such a way that it is always to benefit the beneficiaries of the trust, and you can appoint the trustees who makes these financial decisions basically in your absence. But it is important to note that a trust is not really tax efficient. So talk to your advisor or talk to a tax expert that can help you just to make sure that you don't waste money in the form of unnecessary taxes.
And then your estate. The estate can be also nominated by your own doing. So you can nominate your estate to receive the proceeds from a life insurance policy. You'll remember from the previous episode on the life cover, we talked about a capital need. That will be where you made provision to settle the debt on an outstanding bond, or on an installment sale agreement on your car, or any other debt that you might have. Then you would necessarily nominate your estate as the beneficiary on that portion of the life insurance policy. because it's going to give the executor some liquidity to set off that bond and to make sure that your estate is solvent. If you don't nominate the beneficiary on any life insurance policy, so if you, for instance, take out life cover, but you fail to nominate anybody on that application, then your estate will be nominated by default as the beneficiary. And that's where a lot of problems can exist, because you have a goal in mind, or you want to make provision for your family, but failing to nominate them is going to leave the money in the hands of the executor, and it can take months for that estate to be wound up, and then they might be sitting without the funds to look after them.
The last beneficiary is a third party. So this is a family member or a person that you've nominated on your life insurance policy. Well, it's just important to note that obviously it's going to attract, there will be a tax implication on that money that's paid, but the benefit is it will be paid directly to that person in the event of death, because there's still that legal binding. So just a couple of tips in closing. I think it's important, as mentioned, to name beneficiaries. We deal with a lot of people that forget to name beneficiaries, or they always think they'll get back to it. Name your beneficiary and make sure that the purpose of this policy, or the purpose of the endowment policy or investment policy that you've nominated, is for that intended beneficiary.
Also, just Stefan, on that point, is when you nominate a beneficiary, a lot of these insurance companies require you to provide that ID number. I've also seen where somebody nominates a beneficiary, but they don't provide an ID number. So they would need to track down the person in the event of your death to be able to pay those proceeds to them. So 100%. It's very important that do an audit when you nominate the beneficiary, and make sure that you've provided that ID number as well.
Also, on that note, is name a backup beneficiary. People tend to forget that, and ask if it's available. Look at the application form that you normally complete, whether there is a secondary or backup beneficiary that you can nominate in the event of a predeceased. So if the beneficiary that you've nominated is predeceased you, then again it will end up in the estate, because that beneficiary is no longer with us. So always important to remember that as well.
And then lastly, like I said, do regular audits. Make sure that those beneficiaries that you've nominated is still valid. I take a good example is if you've nominated your estate as a beneficiary for liquidity to settle debt. If that debt no longer exists, so if you've paid off that debt, then you don't want that process to pay to the estate anymore. You can rather reduce the life cover, or you can nominate it to an alternative beneficiary.
Yes, so coordinate your beneficiaries throughout various life events. That's us for today. Thank you so much for joining in again. If you haven't done so, please go to the bottom of this page and subscribe, and feel free to comment. If there's stuff that we try to touch on the basics, and we try to keep it as simple and structured as possible. But please feel free to share some comments or questions, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.